everyone. This is update for November 24 and 23, uh, day 274 of the war. So we passed 9 months of the war at this point. So on 23rd, there was well, let's say it wasn't really large, but it was pretty strong attack on Ukrainian energy distribution system. This is the map, just general information for everyone. This is actually from Ukrainian authorities. Uh, the result is pretty devastating. I would say at this point it is unclear what's going to happen, but in the future. But what happened? Let me explain this. So and why it's devastating. So again, there were attacks against those transformers and distribution devices between the power lines. And as a result of that, remaining three nuclear power stations, one is here in Rimnitska region, then this one in Khmelnytsky and South Ukrainian. Here, they were all disconnected from the power grid because what happened is power grid cannot take off the energy that's being produced by the nuclear power stations, and obviously that creates a problem, overload on the power station, so the security safety devices basically shut them down essentially. And this happened to many other power generation facilities. So as a result, the whole basically country descended into energy collapse. Uh, so another point that's happening is there's in most places there's no water, no running water in the cities, and as I mentioned before, cities are turning essentially into traps, death traps, I would say, to be more precise. They are generally death traps, but this is becoming very obvious and very dangerous. Uh, so, like for example, mayor of Kiev kind of called on you know inhabitants to leave. The problem is that many of the sort of city dwellers, they don't really have places to go where, right? So they somewhat, in a way, it's kind of like disconnection, right? So people who sort of connected, they have their own houses and everything. They sort of somewhat, in a way, socially separated from people who are, let's say, prefer to live in apartments, right? So this creates a lot of problems. Remains to be seen what's going to happen, but essentially country completely paralyzed. You cannot really do any work. The 80 only 20% of ATMs working. People start buying boiled water. There's shortages of boiled water, shortages of cash, like shortages of everything. There is a traffic jam on railroads. Many trains are delayed by 10, 20 hours. Ukrainian railroads are trying to switch to the diesel locomotives where possible, but as you can imagine, there's sort of just sort of I don't know exact sort of distribution between diesel locomotives and electrical locomotives, and you cannot replace because you don't have enough of diesel ones. So there are even attempts to use this kind of like sort of like a local locomotives. I don't know how they called, but they're not intended for long haul routes. They just intended to just like for the station to kind of like move carriages around the station. So there are attempts even to use that. So basically, situation is extremely difficult, desperate. I would say. Where the system will be able to sort of restart as one system is remains to be seen, but it looks like it's essentially start of the collapse of the energy distribution system. Again, this makes all cities are uninhabitable because if you don't have a supply of heat, water, the pipelines will get blown up, and essentially, and you don't even have water, as I said. So this really, you know, the situation is extremely difficult. Let's put this way in very mild terms. Um, then let's actually switch a little bit from Ukraine, and I mentioned this because that's like really, you know, critical situation for Ukraine. One more thing I wanted to add: there might be significant inflow of refugees back to Europe as a result of all of this. And I'm saying, and by that I mean like million, 2 million. It will remains to be seen. But I would not be surprised that the flow of refugees goes back out of Ukraine in the near future, because essentially you really like in a trap. There's essentially no, you cannot even work to kind of like sort of sustain yourself in many ways. So that's the situation. Then there is another sort of news, or I just want to provide some information. So there is, I mentioned this before. There is ammonia pipeline that goes through Ukraine from Russia, from Telyat in Russia, which is like on the Volga River, and it goes kind of. This is the map of it, and then it goes to this. It's called it's called formally Odessa Port Factory, but what it is essentially a processing facility that processes ammonia, and the ammonia is basically you know input in the production of nitrogen fertilizer, urea. So this is basically goes to this Odessa plant, and which is actually not in Odessa, as you can see. There's this town called Southern, and so that's where it actually is. So there is quite a bit of negotiation going on right now, back and forth between Russia and Ukraine. Russia wants to use it because it produces a significant amount of US dollars and euros for them. It's very, how to say, very competitive on the international market. And I'll discuss that later. Is essentially Russia is almost shut down in terms of export of natural gas. So then ability to switch to the production of fertilizer becoming vitally critical. There's also kind of branch that goes here. You can see there's Horlivka. There's another facility here that does essentially similar things. Converts it into urea, and then there's also uh, additional chemical processing operations there. So what Ukraine is asking in return for reopening this pipeline is return of all Ukrainian POWs or prisoners of war. So these negotiations are still going on. Remains to be seen if this is going to happen or not. But that's what's going on. Oh, and then in terms of Ukrainian POWs, so Russian military command announced that they formed entire battalion from former Ukrainian POWs that will be obviously serving in the Russian forces. So again, just another sort of, I don't know if it's propaganda or real situation. Remains to be seen. Now let's actually talk a little bit about Russia. So Russia is also, while Ukraine is completely like wiped out, there's nothing even to discuss there. It's just a black hole, and you probably have seen pictures of the world in the middle of the night, and Ukraine is basically black. Where everywhere else is there is light around Ukraine. But let's actually look at the Russian economy, Russian situation. Situation there is getting also pretty bad economically and pretty desperate. Essentially, Russian export of Russian natural gas uh, close to be halted. I think the out of what Gazprom could export, they're exporting around like from sort of standard amount only about 10%. So I think let's say they were exporting about like 200 billion cubic meters to Europe. They're exporting plus minus 20 at this point, right? So the revenue that's coming from that euros and USD is, as you can imagine, only 10%. I mean, it's higher because the price of the natural gas is much higher than it used to be. It used to be like what, 500 $600 per thousand cubic meters. Now it's well above 1,000, 1,200, I think, and remains there. So they still, so this means equivalent that if we compare apples to apples, so Russia's still kind of like out of 200, Russia essentially is exporting, as if Russia is exporting 50 billion cubic meters out of one. So basically, it's quarter, 25% essentially. Even though in nominal terms it's only 10%, something like that. So as you can see, that's like why this sanctions in some ways don't work in some ways. Well, we can say that Russia is losing those that revenue, but it doesn't. It's not going to change its will to continue the fight. So as a result of that, Russia there is essentially bank runs starting to develop in the Russian financial system, in Russian banking system. So clients in Russian banking system pulled 63 billion US dollars out of their accounts. Out of that, 35 million, sorry, 35 billion was pulled by individuals, and 28 billion was pulled by commercial entities, companies, and things like that. So again, this is the fastest, and the pace of outflow is really accelerating. Uh, so again, to the point that there were shortages of U.S. dollars and euros right now in Russia. So that exchange rate that I mentioned, that everybody sees, I mentioned this before. It's fake and it's unreal. And it's probably going to become very clear in couple probably months or two, probably more like a 2 months, is that there is essentially slow motion implosion of Russian financial system and more like a currency, Russian currency. And this is a reflection of the destruction that's happening in the Russian economy, first of all, and obviously loss of the loss of the revenue from export. There is also a very interesting piece of information: is Russian pharmaceuticals industry is essentially dropping suddenly, very sort of quickly. It was in October. The drop was 8.5% year on year in the production. Before it actually was growing. So since the beginning of the year, industry grew by about 20%. And you can imagine, because the military needs a lot of this pharmaceuticals and stuff like that. So what is happening right now is that Russia is because essentially all of this pharmaceutical industry in Russia is basically like buying ingredients from the West and essentially then combining them to make the basically generics of the Western medical medicine. So sorry, I apologize. And because Russia cannot buy those ingredients anymore, so the production is going down as well. So this probably will lead to, maybe obviously not immediate, but again in 2 3 months, is to very severe effects on the Russian, you know, healthcare system and ability to support wounded on the front line. There's a lot of already like huge problems for the Russian infantry. For example, they don't have these tourniquets that help you to stop bleeding. Well, they don't stop, but at least you, how to say, stop it for a little bit, like for half an hour, 40 minutes, so you can get to the hospital and to the doctor in the doctor's hands. Let's put it this way. So they really don't have that, and essentially they go and use like rubber bands and things from like World War II, and they really don't work well. And essentially, there's a lot of like it's already a huge problem, and it's just gonna turn into even bigger problem there. At the same time, Pakistan, which I mentioned, this is essentially a lie, or I know, puppet of China at this point. And I know some of the viewers saying that people in Pakistan hate Chinese. Doesn't matter. What the top does, and that's where Pakistan is moving. And what's happening is that Pakistan is now saying that it's willing to process Russian crude and obviously then resell it. So what remains to be basically what I'm trying to say. There's enough takers around the world for the Russian crude, and crude is it's called the black gold for a reason, because it's extremely convertible. You can easily convert it into cash. There's tons of buyers. There's no shortage of buyers. With natural gas, it's much more difficult, but with crude, it's literally like almost like selling narcotics or something like that. There's never a problem to sell those. Then also energy switch, continuing with energy, but now switching to Europe. And I mentioned this before many times. As long as Europe is not going to change its energy policy, and in a way, I would say even apologize to the sort of to the conventional energy producers and some kind of pass some kind of laws that prevent this abuse in the future, uh, Europe will remain in this limbo of energy disaster for foreseeable futures. There's no way out of that. This also was so one reason I'm saying this, because this was also confirmed by one of the largest oil traders, Vitol, which I think based out of either Switzerland or Netherlands. But they essentially saying the same thing, and I would argue that things will get much worse. This was sort of so at this point it's still kind of like uh, Europe managed to sort of get out pretty sort of get by, but but eventually, gravity will catch and it will be pretty disastrous situation. Uh, okay. Oh, and then actually a little bit about Russia and China. So if you remember, I mentioned that Russia has only two train lines that connected uh, to China, and they have like totally not enough capacity to export all of the commodities to China. So and there's total bottleneck, and Russia is essentially uh, stopped exporting those commodities because there's not the takeoff is not there. So what they're trying to do now, they're trying to build the railroad bridge between obviously China and Russia to shorten those that route in a hope that it will create kind of like a third route, or at least it will increase throughput to some extent to alleviate the bottleneck. It's not going to resolve the problem, but as you can see, they start to sort of moving, call it, in the right direction for the Russia. Let's put it this way. Then actually, let's talk a little bit about China. And in China, the head of European Council is going to visit China on I think on December 1st. This is actually the same member who whose speech was censored by the Chinese authority, where he was saying, calling on China not to support essentially Russia, and that was supposed to be aired during like trade expo in China, and it was censored by the Chinese authorities. So now he's actually going to China to discuss, obviously, relationship. I don't think there's going to be much out of it. It's just, uh, as I say, another one bites the dust. Then actually going back to China, things getting really heated in China, and there are a few, how to say, yardsticks to kind of prove that. So first, three main Chinese banks, which is Bank of China, Bank of Communications, and Agricultural Bank of China, they started giving loans to all of these failed Chinese real estate developers to keep them afloat, so they didn't go bankrupt, basically, to kind of stay off like this implosion of the real estate bubble that that China is going through. It's not going to solve the problem. It's going to happen anyways. But Chinese government tries to do it, and the reason I'm saying Chinese government is because essentially these banks are state controlled. Yes, there's large sort of minority shareholders at some points up to like almost like 48, 49%, but it's still Chinese government behind these banks, and it drives and creates a strategy for them and drives their sort of where they're gonna go. Another data point that things are really getting heated in China is, first of all, there is this protests at Foxconn factory in China. I think there's like 200,000 workers there, and it's not really about the way it's presented. It's just some unhappiness about the worker, about condition at Foxconn. But I would look at it from sort of bigger picture. Is just part of larger discontent and problems within Chinese society, and this is just one of the sort of outlets where people can sort of vent it, versus in many other places they cannot. And so this is again, the social tension is completely rising in China. And there's another data point: is there's complete lockdown in Beijing, which is capital of China. Again, authorities do lockdown to control population. Obviously, it's not this, it's not there to, to fight COVID or whatever. It's definitely to suppress, so people don't protest, don't go and protest, essentially. So as you can see, the situation is getting really difficult socially in China, and that really may accelerate Chinese desire to attack Taiwan sooner than later. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that Chinese leadership may have no choice but to do it now. Like in sort of like ideal situation, as I mentioned before, Chinese leadership doesn't want to do it till at least, I think I mentioned April of the next year, till at least, could be even later. But things are really getting really extremely heated inside of China, and they may be forced to sort of release all of that negative energy on on Taiwan at the same time. Um, that oh, and then there was a very interesting, basically, I would say, speech or article by one of the U.S. congressmen who went to Taiwan in October, and basically he was saying that U.S. military is behind the curve, not doing right things, not being prepared for the eventual sort of attack on Taiwan. So essentially, basically, looks like if, let's say, China attacks Taiwan, in the near future, within months to whatever, U.S. military will basically fail. That's the message that I would say I'm taking away from this congressman. Sorry, I forgot the last name. I'll look it up. I just remember it was Democratic congressman. That's all I just remember about him. But if anyone interested, just ping me, and I'll let you know what's his name and all of that detail. The other important part that he said, and that's what I would say, I felt the same way, is that actually the Taiwanese military will probably crumble pretty quickly. And the reason for that, as I mentioned before, the Taiwanese society in a way is split. And I don't know exact split, probably close to 50-50, maybe 40-60, but at least probably, 35-40% are sort of supporting becoming part of China. And so, and there's a lot of those people in Taiwanese military. So it remains to be seen if Taiwanese military will be even putting any kind of, stiff resistance, because there is a lot of sort of hope or thinking that it's going to be similar to what's going on in Ukraine. And based on what information I have, it's not, it doesn't look like it's going to be sort of something similar to Ukraine. It's going to be much faster, and it looks like, in terms of like, call it Chinese success, and the reason for that is just because there is significant portion in Taiwanese military and in society at large that actually supports becoming part of China. And then we're also kind of learning right now, as I said, that U.S. military is essentially completely unprepared for anything, even to unblock uh, the isolation of Taiwan by Chinese Navy. So things are really, I would say, in a dangerous situation in that part of the world. Now let's walk through the front line in Ukraine. We're going to start from the north, and we're going to move down in a clockwise fashion. So situation along the state border are pretty quiet. I would say there's still exchange, but extremely low activity on both sides. Now let's look at North Luhansk front line. Things here actually also quiet. It looks like both sides are switching to positional defenses. No major attacks on either side here, which is actually pretty quite significant change for this front line. Now let's look at um, at North Donbass front line. Things here are this is the only place where there's active, well, that's not the only one, but uh, where Russian side is putting Ukrainian forces in extremely difficult situation. Specifically, Wagner mercenaries. They continue their attacks. They put extremely heavy pressure, uh, and Ukrainian defenders have really hard time defending against Wagner mercenaries. And I mentioned this before. It's not governmental system; it's more sort of common sense system, and it works much better. And Ukraine still, even there's significant, I'd say, desire to defend by Ukrainian soldiers. The problem in Ukrainian system that disempowers people and essential soldiers. By that I mean, and it really is not a match to the Wagner mercenary system. I actually have a little bit more information on their sort of tactical approach. So I'm thinking of doing that tomorrow, if that works out. If not, then in a couple next days. But there is interesting information on how they actually operate and their tactics, and it will become much more clear from that analysis why why is it sort of like slowly but surely winning, and they inflict heavy sort of losses on the Ukrainian side in terms of the soldier lives. They also have heavy losses. There's no question about that. But I'll do more analysis in one of the couple days, and you'll understand better the whole sort of dynamics and why it's I would say most dangerous Russian system that's available right on the front line right now, and there is no match on Ukrainian side to that. Maybe Azov could be a match to extend, but it's wiped out, non-existent at this point. So Ukraine doesn't have anything sort of that could match that system. Now let's just look a little bit more. So as you can see, they're pretty active around Bakhmut, and six here getting there's no sort of like formal advances, nothing happened, but as you can imagine, eventually something will crumble on the Ukrainian side. Now let's look at central Donbass front line. Six here, somewhat, also somewhat active, but I would say less activity. Typical attacks from this salient around Novobakhmutivka, from this Piske salient, with, as I mentioned many times, the whole idea is to outflank Ukrainian troops and force withdrawal from Avdiivka. It is far from sort of Russian troops far from achieving it, but they really slowly advancing in the right direction. Let's put it this way. And then attacks in Marika. Russian sources claim that they had some advances there, especially in the northern part of the town, or the large village. I would say I don't even know what's the best way to describe it, but remains to be seen if those are real or just because they tend to obviously to overblow their achievements and so on. It could be just another 50 meters of the or another quarter that was captured, and it's just blown out of proportion. So remains to be seen, but doesn't look like Ukrainian defenses here are crumbling. Now let's quickly check Zaporizhya front line, the most sort of quiet section of the front line in general. Things here remain quiet, and essentially there's nothing, nothing new going on there. So that's all for today, and this is also covers yesterday. Essentially, there are no major changes on the front lines over past 2 days. So things remain status quo more or less. Again, thanks for watching, and until tomorrow, bye bye.